So within the first 3 days that I was in China, I'd found myself a girlfriend. And she taught me very quickly that Chinese relationships are more about utility and less about feelings. So during my first trip to China, I was hooked. I was hooked on the idea of the lifestyle. I'd gone there for business, but I was amazed and rather taken aback by the vibe of the place. The fact that everything was open at night. I was in Shenzhen, which is this incredible growth engine for China. It's the first city to ever open up to Western investment and be part of that whole experiment to bring China out of the dark ages. I loved it as a young man, being able to walk outside and just see the lights and the people and the busyness and the vibe. And the fact that I'd found myself a girlfriend within the first 3 days also helped. Quite a lot, actually. Anyway, you probably know the story by now. I went home, sold my cars, sold my furniture, and went back to China to try and make a life there. I thought this was the place I wanted to be. This is the place I want to experience. And I want to move forward and see where it goes and go on this big adventure. I was in a very precarious position, though. I did not know the language. I didn't know anyone, well, other than the factory salespeople that I'd met when I went there on my business trip. And of course, this girl that I'd met. Out of respect for my wife, I'm not going to get into too much detail, but I'm going to tell you why this relationship was so important and why it really showed me very quickly how Chinese relationships are very different to Western relationships. So first of all, how did we meet? Well, it's pretty straightforward. I was staying in this hotel, and it happened to be in an area that was frequented by Japanese businessmen. In other words, the whole area kind of catered for Japanese businessmen. There are Japanese restaurants, Japanese karaoke bars, that sort of thing. And I, at that point in my life, had been studying Japanese. I actually went to university to study Japanese in South Africa. And I knew a fair amount of Japanese. I could say I'd be on a very basic conversational level. Of course, nowhere near fluent or anything like that, but enough to get by. And it just happened to be fluke that this particular area and part of Shenzhen was, like I said, a hotspot for Japanese businessmen. So all of the local restaurants and so on catered for this. Right next to our hotel, there was a restaurant, which became one of my favorite restaurants in Shenzhen. And it was there that I'd gone for dinner, snuck out for dinner, because the guy I was with, my boss at the time, or I should say my client who'd paid for the trip, didn't want me going out because he was a staunch security-minded person. That was his business, was security, VIP protection, bodyguards, and then, of course, security cameras and all of that kind of thing. That's why I was there. So he kind of didn't forbid me from going out, but he basically didn't want me going anywhere. He didn't want to have to deal with any trouble, didn't want me to get shanghaied or anything like that. Shanghaied in Shenzhen. So, I kind of made excuses to go down. Oh, I'm just going to go drink in the bar downstairs. But I found my way outside, of course, and explored the streets because I was all about adventure and seeing what was going on. And there was a restaurant right there that I walked into. It was very appealing to me because I saw standing outside, down at the bottom, was a waitress in a kimono, could speak Japanese, so I could speak to her. Took me upstairs, I sat down, ordered some food. これって何?
ヒラメです。
ああ、そうか。
ヒラメって英語で何かな？
知らないよ。ああ、本当にレモンが好きですか？
レモンが好きですね。
Could speak Japanese, so this was great. It's the first time in my life that I could properly practice my Japanese because there isn't a hell of a lot of Japanese-speaking people in South Africa. All right, so anyway, this was great for me. Anyway, I kind of hit it off with one of the waitresses. Long story short, I organized to meet her the next day after work when she was finished, and we went out and we had more meals and so on. We kind of hit it off and things kind of went from there. Do you remember when I took an extra wallet and tried to make it look more trendy by throwing on some coffee beans and putting a couple of props nearby? Yeah, I remember that too. It wasn't that long ago. And guess what? I didn't need to use those props because the wallet sells itself. So far, everybody that I know who's bought one of these wallets on my recommendation has gotten back to me to tell me just how much they enjoy their extra wallet. And I don't blame him. I really enjoy mine too. I'm not joking when I say it really changed my life. At least the part of my life where putting cards in a wallet is concerned. So whether you're looking for a trendy wallet to suit your image or just something practical, good, that'll last you for years to come, I can fully suggest you get an Exto wallet. They also make fantastic gifts. I mean, think about it. Who doesn't use a wallet? A practical, good-looking wallet is always something somebody can use. Right now there's a Father's Day sale. Yes, that's right. Don't forget, Father's Day is coming up soon. Go and jump on their website, you'll get 20% off everything, and on top of that, if you go to shop.extra.com/SerpentZA, you'll get a further discount on anything you buy. Get yourself one of these awesome wallets. Link is in the description below. And now, back to the video. I of course kept her contact details when I was back in South Africa, because I flew back. We spoke on Skype and so on and so forth, and the relationship kind of grew from there. We got to know each other more and more. So when I flew back to China on my crazy adventure with the idea that I was just going to go there and see what I could do and what I could find out, she was very eager to meet with me. And, you know, I stayed in a hotel and she pretty much moved in with me. So there she was. We were in this relationship together. We could speak to each other in Japanese because turns out, and this is kind of weird, but the rapist school, if you've watched my video about being a bodyguard for a Chinese serial rapist, she was attending the rapist school, one of the branches nearby, which was teaching Japanese. Because she worked at a Japanese restaurant and she had to learn the language, and she was actually very close to fluent in Japanese. And this is what helped me not being able to speak Chinese. So, of course, she was a fantastic help in the beginning. She helped me get a SIM card for my phone. She helped me when I needed to get things done that I couldn't understand with regards to the hotel and, you know, paying extra bills or whatever I had to do, right? And she, like I said, was living with me during that period. So now I hit the part where I wanted to try and find work. So she got one of her friends to come around, and the two of them together, a friend of hers who worked at the restaurant with her as well, like her manager. And together we went through sort of the local classifieds in Chinese, and I very, very quickly realized that this was a dead end. There was no way that I could find a job in China, like a regular job. You see, my background is in IT. That's where all my qualifications are. That's where all my experience is in IT. And China just doesn't have a market for a foreign IT professional. It's just not there. Unless, of course, you're some kind of a hotshot programmer that can go and work for one of the big software development companies or something like that. But the way China works is very different to the rest of the world. Even fairly large companies run off of SOHO networks, you know, small office, home office networks, where they just run everything off Windows XP and they have like a router and they just share files or do whatever they do. None of these businesses have Microsoft servers installed or Exchange servers or directory tree or whatever the case, you know, none of this stuff, no licensing, nothing like that. It's just all pirated software, and it all runs on a very rudimentary ad hoc kind of a setup. So there's no need for somebody who has qualifications in Exchange server, for instance, or, you know, at the time I was a Windows NT4 Microsoft certified systems engineer, which, of course, nobody's using that in China, so there's no use for that skill. Even my Windows 2000 and Server 2000 qualifications, useless, right? So I couldn't get a job in IT. Never mind the fact that even if I could find a job, say, fixing computers, it's impossible to make any money because of the huge amount of skilled labor when it comes to that in China. You can get a guy who will come up to your house, fix your computer for you for like $5 to $10 US. No matter what the problem is, he'll come and fix it and off you go. So you can't make a living doing it, all right? It's just impossible. The competition's too much. So it started to look kind of bleak for me. I didn't really know where I was going to go. I couldn't find a job. My girlfriend at the time couldn't help me find a job. Her friends couldn't help me find a job because, you know, I wasn't Chinese. And unfortunately, without a Chinese ID card and without the language ability, there's really no option for a foreigner. The only real jobs available for foreigners, in all honesty, if you're not already there as part of a big corporation and you're a manager or something, the only jobs that are really available are English teaching jobs, let's be honest, and the occasional white monkey job where you get to, I don't know, stand there and advertise a bottle of cognac or something like that. So things were looking kind of bleak. I applied for jobs and put my resume up on all different websites and so on, all the sort of foreign expat type websites, which there were only very few at the time. And I just wasn't getting any bites. I went to go and try and find other foreigners who lived in the city. Back then it was very different to now. There were very few foreigners in Shenzhen. You could go walk around for 2-3 weeks without seeing another foreigner on the streets at all. So I went to go hang out at like a little foreign expat bars and things and talk to them, and everybody was full of promises and nobody came through. You're like, oh yeah, I'll see if I can get you a job at my school or whatever, that kind of thing. And I still hadn't figured things out. And I was fresh off the boat. I was a greenhorn, and people knew that, and it's kind of tough. You need to have a decent amount of experience to really do the English teaching thing well. Everybody thinks it's easy, but it's actually not. It's actually quite a difficult profession to be in. It's very high energy. You need to know what you're doing. And whenever you go apply for a job, of course, you have to do a demo class. You have to impress them and you have to show them that you're capable of doing it. And then you get the job type thing. I hadn't figured anything out. Anyway, I'm getting besides the point here. I was not having luck finding a job. Okay. And my money was running out. And the hotel I was staying in was a nice hotel. I'd say it's pretty good. Like, I'd give it like a 6 or 7 out of 10 even. It's not like it was super fancy or anything, but it was really nice. I enjoyed it. My girlfriend at the time enjoyed living there, but I didn't have enough money to stay there anymore. So together, me and my girlfriend started looking around for a cheaper hotel. We even took a look at some apartments. I mean, I really wish I knew what I was doing in the beginning, because I would have just rented an apartment for the time. And I could have stayed in an apartment for at least 6 months to a year on my savings, but instead I burned through my savings staying at a hotel in a matter of like a month and a half. So we downgraded to a cheaper hotel, and this one was pretty nasty. I mean, it wasn't terrible. It wasn't the worst thing in the world, but it definitely wasn't great. Now, I was still having a good time. It was still an adventure for me. I was still walking around every day and exploring the city, and, my girlfriend, like I said, used to work at the restaurant, and so after work I'd meet up with her and we'd go back to the hotel and we'd go out for dinner and that kind of thing. So things were actually pretty good. Even though I knew my time was running out, I still was enjoying myself and having a great time. Anyway, things started to go south. The money started to dry up, like I said, and I could no longer afford to go out for dinner and do all these things, even though it's cheap to do so in China. And one day my girlfriend just didn't meet me when she was supposed to meet me. And that was it. I couldn't find her. She was no longer working at the restaurant where I'd met her. I went to go and try and track her down. Nothing. And it was tough. It was tough for me to deal with, This was my lifeline. She was my lifeline when I first got to China. And this is somebody who I, had a certain amount of affection and feelings for, of course. And she just up and went. It was kind of devastating, to be fair. But I had to deal with it. But you know what? I have to be honest with you. There'd been quite a few things that had really shocked me about my relationship with her. And this is something that I would find to be fairly universal when it came to dating Chinese women. Obviously, not all of them. Depends where they're from and their social status. Of course, if you've got somebody from a more rural, poorer background, you'll find certain attributes. And if you've got someone from a rich background, of course, things are a little different there. But there's still quite a lot of overlap, I could say. And one of the things I found was the bluntness and the brutal honesty that can be quite hurtful. And I'll give you an example of this. Is I was walking around and I found what I thought was a very nice necklace for her, and I bought this for her. You see, using what little money I had left, I bought this for her. And when I came to give it to her, she looked at it and said, "No, she doesn't want it." It's like, "No, I don't want it. Give it to someone else. Give it to your mom or something." I was like, okay. That's kind of weird for me, because at least where I grew up, if somebody gives you a gift, even if you don't like it per se, you still graciously accept it and say, "Thank you, that's really nice of you," or "Thank you very much." You don't have to use it or wear it or anything like that. But this happened a couple of times where I'd buy her something and she'd be like, "Nah, don't want it. It's not something I care about," or "I don't like it," that kind of thing. And that was something that was a big culture shock to me. That's not something that I'd had to deal with in the past. So that was number one. A bit of an insight into the pragmatism of Chinese relationships. I mean, this really hit home later, and we'll get into that, how she tracked me down again when I had money again. But the fact of the matter is, you have to think about it. She in particular was from Hunan, from a fairly rural background, had come to the city to look for work, as so many people do. Shenzhen is like that. It's like the That's the city of gold. It's where everybody, if they get a chance, they come down to Shenzhen to seek their fortune, to find work, because being right next to Hong Kong, there's always money flowing in there. There's a huge service industry, whether it's the restaurant industry, there's some or other service industry, and of course the more dodgy stuff like massage parlors and brothels and that kind of thing as well is all there. So all the spas and things, karaoke's, you name it. And it's always kind of been like that. So the rich Hong Kong guys come over the border and, they throw their money around. And so that's kind of what built the city up in the first place. Never mind all the foreign investment and stuff too. So anyway, she was from a fairly rural background, but she was well educated, like I said, at least from the point of view that she had learned Japanese fluently and, she was incredibly smart. So let's fast forward a little bit here. We'd kind of started our relationship proper in about March of 2006. And now, after she'd left and disappeared, and after I'd ended up homeless for a while, and after I'd done all that struggle to kind of get back on my feet, and I finally had moved into a decent apartment. I finally had a good job, a good paying job, which was actually at the rapist school, believe it or not. Things were on the up and up, things were looking good for me. I was finally on track again and everything was going great. And I'd been featured in this ridiculous advertisement campaign for this school that I was working for, this training center, the CCVIP. And now this video that you see on the screen here, this was being played all over the city, on TV, as like a TV advertisement, on all of the elevators. In China, there's this thing. In the buildings, when you walk into most apartment buildings, right next to the elevators, because people have to wait every day for the elevator to come down, they have little LCD screens playing adverts. And my advert was on that. So it was across the entire city in every apartment building and shopping malls and things like that. So, you could say that my face was everywhere around the city. Well, anyway, she'd obviously seen me on the adverts. Everybody had, I suppose. And she'd come to track me down. And here I was sitting at work, and what we used to do at this CCVIP, the rapist school, is we'd have like a free English language aptitude test. And what would happen is people could book this free aptitude test, you see, and then they get a sales pitch, of course, that's how business works. But they'd come in, and they'd sit down. We had this counter where all the foreign teachers would sit when they weren't teaching class. So when you had your free time, you sit there and, twiddle your thumbs or whatever. But most of your time would be busy with these aptitude tests. So what would happen is a member of public would come and sit down, and you'd ask them a bunch of questions, and you'd basically give them a rating on how good their English was. And then you could suggest which class they should enroll in, and the usual kind of thing. Now, I was sitting there one day, and down sits my ex-girlfriend, the one who disappeared. And she'd dolled herself up. She had a new hairstyle. She'd colored her hair. She was looking good. She's wearing, the best clothes she could get her hands on, I suppose. The sexiest, nicest outfit. And there she was. She sat down in front of me, and I was kind of shocked to see her. And she wasn't there for the test. Of course, she was there to see me. And she wanted to kind of get back together. So I was actually single at the time, and, it was a kind of a weird situation for me because I was, at the same time, I was quite happy to see her again, but at the same time also not very happy to see her again, if that makes any sense. But we exchanged details, and I agreed to meet her, after work again. Anyway, so things kind of got back on track, actually, with her. I was very cautious, but a good thing I was cautious. I'll tell you why. Because it turns out that during the time that we'd been apart, she'd gotten married. Okay? And this is another thing I found out about relationships in China, is that marriage is not taken as seriously as it is in Western countries. And when I say that, I mean, when it comes to being faithful in your marriage, it really isn't a thing in China. People might think that I'm over-exaggerating, but anyone who's lived in China will understand. And it comes from the fact that most couples are more or less pressured and forced into getting married very young in China. So you get married when you're in your early 20s, 23, 22, thereabouts. So you get married, have a kid, and you head on off and do your thing with your family, and you buy the house. Well, you first buy the house, married, have a kid, grandparents move in, or should say parents move in, and that's kind of how it goes. So I think we all know what it's like when you're young and you get into a relationship. You don't know what you're doing. You don't have a lot of experience. You generally will choose the wrong person, or you fall out of love with that person and you just don't know what to deal with it. Now you're stuck in a marriage, in a loveless marriage. And this is it's a huge issue in China, loveless marriages. In fact, I've got a whole video about it where I interviewed a guy from a Shanghai sex shop, and that's one of his specialties is to counsel people because they're in loveless marriages, right? And I have to be completely honest with you. The majority of my male Chinese friends would cheat on their wives. It's almost a socially acceptable thing to do. I mean, there's all the brothel culture and the KTVs and all that kind of thing. Of course, it's not everyone, like my friend Simon, who's awesome. You're such a good guy. Awesome guy. But the thing is, it's very common for men to cheat on their wives. And it works the other way too. I have been, during my time when I was training adults, doing English training and English teaching, I often married women would come on to me. Of course, I'd refuse them, and that's just because my upbringing has taught me that cheating on somebody or, being a home wrecker or whatever the case may be is probably one of the most terrible things you can really do. So I personally stay away from that. Even when I met my current wife, I made sure I was 100% divorced and everything was clear before anything happened there. Same with her. So, it's just one of those things. It's a standard I hold myself to. It doesn't matter if you don't have to agree with me, but I'm just explaining to you my motivations because it's important as to what happened next. So we kind of got back into this relationship, and she's hanging out at my place, and, we're just staying the night and all that kind of thing. And she gets a phone call. And I hear on the other side of the line a man, like, kind of exacerbated in Japanese, asking, like, where are you? What are you doing? Where are you? And I realized at that point that something was going on. And I asked her outright, like, who is that? And she was like, that's my husband. And I've never felt more... I don't know how to explain. I never felt more dirty in my life. It was really an awful, awful feeling. And of course, I had to break it off. Right then and there, I was like, this is just, I'm walking away from this. I'm not going to be a part of this. This isn't me. And of course, I didn't have any idea that she was married. She didn't tell me she was married. Wedding rings are not a thing in China. You don't often see people that are married wearing wedding rings either, so that's not something you can just spot and tell. I had no idea she was married, so she ran away when I didn't have enough money. She disappeared. She sees me on TV, sees that I've got my life back together, that I'm now fairly successful. She tracks me down. Even though she's now married, she tracks me down, starts a relationship with me because I guess her married life is boring, or she doesn't like her husband, or whatever the case may be, starts up another relationship with me while she's married. This really taught me a lot about not only relationships in China, but the nature of Chinese society and how it's been shaped by the past. And you have to understand that it's been a real struggle up until very recently for people in China. It's kind of getting back into the whole struggle territory, but it's not there just yet. But I'm talking about my parents' age, okay? People that were living in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the 80s went through hell. They went through absolute hell in China, and survival was the name of the game. So they didn't have time for lofty ideals like love and, all that mushy stuff and Valentines and, all that kind of nonsense. That just wasn't a part of it. It's practical. It's about survival. So you meet someone, you get married, you have a kid. So the kid can look after you when you get old and you can move in with them. It's all like a utilitarian sort of a setup. And there is very little place for love and feelings. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Of course it's there and it does exist, but at least for a couple of generations in China, that's really was not a priority when it came to relationships. And that, of course, passed down to my generation. And that's why that girl from Hunan was the way she was, having been brought up in the sort of time and the place that she was. It's either something that can move her forward in life or something that she can use, or it's useless. She had no time for feelings and for love and all that other kind of nonsense. And I would find this very often in relationships when it came to dating Chinese women, is feelings were really put as a low priority. So honestly, though, that's the story. I have to say something, though, to save my ass here, just in case my wife watches this. And it's the truth. So I'm not making this up, even though it might sound this way. But at least in my lifetime, I've only ever been truly in love twice. Once was in South Africa. And it was a crazy, messed up, youthful situation. And the second time is with my current wife. And I've never felt that way about any other women. I've had good relationships and I've had bad relationships, atrociously terrible relationships. But quite honestly, I really just have to say that I'm so happy that I met my wife and that, we have a beautiful family together. And it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. So that's me telling the truth and kind of saving my ass at the same time, I hope. You think it worked? Anyway, guys, thank you for watching. I hope you found this a little bit enlightening and perhaps a little bit entertaining. And maybe it can help answer a couple of your questions. I know that I get a lot of this from my subscribers who've married Chinese women or Chinese men. And it's quite baffling when it comes down to the whole bluntness and lack of empathy towards another person's feeling in a relationship sometime. And you kind of have to understand that it's due to a different culture and a different set of circumstances. Anyway, until next time, you know the drill. As always, stay awesome. These little night market areas, you know. Food everywhere. Interesting things to see and do. Mainly eat and, well, other basic things.